Good morning, and welcome. We are super excited for today's 2024 Florida Drive-In Workshop. We want to wish you all a happy National School Counseling Week. Woo woo, all the school counselors. So we're going to ask while you are entering and you're getting settled and preparing for an awesome session of learning that we have a little fun in the midst of it. So if you don't mind, entertain us by putting in the chat. We want you to complete the statement. I'm a school counselor. Of course, I ... So that could be, I'm a school counselor. Of course, I don't eat lunch until 2 p.m. We're excited to see what you guys have to say. Sierra, how would you answer yours?
I'm a school counselor. Of course, I have all of the Common App essays prompts memorized. And make sure that you switch it to everyone so everyone can see your answers, please.
Yes.
And if anybody is tuning in for the first time, this is webinar style, so you'll actually have to comment in the Q&A section. I don't believe the chat feature will be enabled.
Oh, well, thank you, because we thought it was on our end. So yes, let's use the Q&A because we do want to see those answers.
And then we'll share them with everyone.
Yes.
Does anyone else on the panel have any?
Oh, there we go. I see it. They're popping up now.
I'm a school counselor. Of course, I live on coffee. Yes.
Yes. Oh, Curly. Hey, Curly.
Oh, I like this one. I'm a
Me
school counselor. Of
too.
course, I appreciate the teenage mind.
Yes. I'm a school. Oh, here's the one. Here's the one. I'm a school counselor. Of course, I still get called a guidance counselor. Major violation. Major violation. But we're working on that. We're working on that.
Ooh, this is real. Okay, of course, I'm a school counselor. Of course, I see students during lunch. That is, yes.
When you get a lunch, it's usually during lunch.
Of course, I know the latest lingo. I mean,
Yes.
you already know this trend as well.
Keep them coming. I love it. I'm a school counselor. Of course, I have extra snacks. I love it. And if you're just joining us, we're going to get started in just a few. We were asking you all to complete the statement in the chat, well, in the Q&A. I'm a school counselor. Of course, I ... That's some awesome responses. Ooh.
And also, as you can see on the screen, happy National School Counseling Week.
Yes.
We highlighted that.
Oh, I'm a school counselor. Of course, I, quote unquote, I have a minute. I love it, Miss D.
That's very real.
That is so real. That is so real. We're going to get started in just another minute, giving people time to log on. And if you need to refuel with your cup of joe, I don't know if you can see mine. I'm a school counselor. Of course, I talk to all students. Absolutely. Thank you, Lisa. Well, awesome. Well, we appreciate you all for participating. And again, we do wish you a happy National School Counseling Week. We hope you've had an amazing week and continue to have an amazing week. And we're going to press forward with our session for today.
Okay, so I'm going to run through a little bit about what you can expect for our workshop today. So welcome. My name is Sierra Outerbridge, and I serve as one of your Florida Drive-In Workshop co-chairs. And then Monique Tubbs, you want to introduce yourself real quick?
Yes, my name is Monique Tubbs, and I am in Polk County. I serve as the District College and Career Coordinator for Polk County Public Schools. So I work closely with school counselors, levels middle and high, and I am a former high school counselor.
Awesome, thank you. In our first session today, we will be hearing from Anthony Jones and Dr. Ashley Robinson Spann about the state of Black enrollment and the changing landscape, evolving trends, and winning strategies. I'm really excited about this presentation. It's data rich, so I'm excited to dive into and hear about what they have to say. In session 2, I know y'all have been really, I've heard about the FAFSA. I know we're all in it. That's every conversation I've been having. So thankfully, we have Pete Hernandez here, who is going to be talking about a better FAFSA, better future, helping school counselors navigate those FAFSA changes. And then in session 3, I will be sharing about self-care strategies at a time of continual changes for today's counselor. So especially in the state of Florida, we've been seeing a lot of different changes. We'll be talking about the FAFSA today, but also maybe some of those changes that we're seeing in the state of Florida, and how we can take care of ourselves. And then in the closing, we'll come back. Monique and I will come back and say hello again. And we'll pass it on to our state area and initiatives to kind of introduce and say hello from them. I don't think that they have video capability right now, but we are underneath the state area and initiative. So if you want to share, that'd be great.
Yes. Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Sierra. My name is Corey Bailey, and as I was sharing with them prior to starting the webinar, I am actually changing offices. I got a new computer installed yesterday, and to my surprise, that said computer doesn't have a sound bar that's with it, so we're having to order that, and also my webcam is not set up. All things before a major webinar like this, but nonetheless, all of you on this call, your school counselors, so you recognize the approach of adapt and overcome, and that's what I'm doing this morning. But we are so excited to have you on this drive-in workshop. One of the things that I specifically like about it, I know that we are all in a state of probably webinar fatigue at this point, but specifically for this program, the state and area initiatives umbrella really seeks to create workshop and professional development opportunities for the members at large, even people that may not even be members of SACAC. And we understand that there are a lot of challenges and barriers for school counselors to have access to things like the annual conference every year. Maybe budgets could be tight sometimes and you can't go there. And unfortunately, in certain states within our affiliate, it doesn't matter where we have a drive-in workshop. Sometimes even that can be a hard for different people to attend that, depending on where you are located in that state. And so by us offering this workshop virtually, I see that we have people from all over the state of Florida that's joining us this morning. And so for that, I'm very thankful that you're able to be here today. Florida is very important to SACAC and the work that you're doing there. And so just really thank you so much for taking some time out of your day this morning to join us for this. The state and area initiatives, our work throughout the year really centers around 2 different programs for each state. We are responsible for coordinating the state meetings that take place in the fall and at the annual conference. And then we also coordinate the drive-in workshops. And so hopefully you receive a lot of really helpful information today, but I can promise you this work would not take place if it wasn't for Monique and Sierra. They are the lifeline for this workshop. And really, me and Darren and Kristen, we just kind of support from the background, but they do the heavy lifting. They've worked with our presenters to line up a wonderful workshop this morning. And so thank you to both of you for the work that you've poured into this. To our presenters this morning, thank you for taking some time away to provide this professional development opportunity for our school counselors across the state of Florida. Your effort, your attention to detail, and your expertise is not going unnoticed this morning. We're so excited to have you with us. And the last thing I'll leave you with is be on the lookout for your email in the coming days, probably within the next week. You'll receive an email from our executive assistant for SACAC. And in that email, if you are looking to earn those CE clock hours, there will be details in there about how to go about registering for those. And then will also be a survey, and we would love for you to fill out that survey so that we can continue to improve this and make sure that we are offering sessions that speak to your needs and the things that you are needing to get out of these types of workshops. So definitely be looking out for that. So with that, that's kind of all that I have to say this morning. But so I will turn things back over to Sierra and Monique.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And thank you for being here. We truly do. I think I can speak on behalf of myself and Sierra. We appreciate the support of you, Kristen, and Darren throughout this process. So we are in a webinar setting. So you do have some restrictions, but we still want to hear from you, right? So while you all are here on time, we know you're going to be attentive. We want to hear from you in the Q&A. The chat feature is not turned on. But what we're asking is that we save all of our questions to the end. But if you're anything like me, jot it down so you don't forget on a piece of paper, or you can put it in the Q&A, and we will be sure to circle back at the end. We want to allow our presenters time to share this valuable information, and then we can have some discussion at the end and answer any questions that you may have.
Awesome. Okay, so thank you so much, Corey and Monique. I now have the honor of introducing our first two presenters this morning. Our first presenter, AJ Jones, is the Vice President for Enrollment Management and Student Experience at Bethune-Cookman University. In this capacity, he oversees the offices of admissions, enrollment services and solutions, enrollment systems, financial aid, and student account services. Along with serving at BCU, Anthony has served as Director of Global Diversity at the Converges Corporation and led talent recruitment for Inroads, Inc. as the National Director for Recruitment Services. And then pertaining to higher education, he has served as Vice President of Enrollment Management at both Fisk University and DePaul University, and Associate Provost and Assistant Vice President of Enrollment Management at Howard University. Anthony has also supported enrollment at a number of HBCUs as a consultant for the United Negro College Fund. Anthony has appeared on news outlets such as ABC, Good Morning America, NBC Washington, and Cheddar News, and been quoted in publications such as quoted in publications. Anthony is a Phi Beta Kappa graduate of Fisk University, holds a master's degree from Vanderbilt University, and a certification in diversity management from the University of Houston. So thank you, Anthony, for being here today, or AJ, for being here today. And then our next presenter on this presentation is Dr. Ashley Robinson-Spann. Dr. Robinson-Spann is an education data analyst and a researcher with over 10 years experience in equity and access in education, college and career readiness, and post-secondary admissions. Presently, she serves as the Senior Director of Higher Education and Analytics with the College Board's Strategic Higher Education team under its Governance and Global Higher Education Division. In her position, Dr. Ashley uses data to drive the development and implementation of strategic initiatives for College Board programs and products, such as Big Future College Profiles, AP, SAT, Landscape, and Student Search Service. Prior to joining the College Board in 2018, Dr. Ashley provided data and analytics leadership to admissions teams at Johns Hopkins University and Georgetown's McDonough School of Business, and to the secondary school reform team at Prince George's County Public Schools, so both on the college and public school side. She holds a BS in economics from the Wharton School of the University of Pennsylvania, an MS in data analytics from the University of Maryland, Global Campus, and a PhD in educational management from Hampton University. Thank you, both of you, for being here today.
Well, thank you very much for that introduction. Hopefully everyone can hear me well. I think I speak on behalf of my co-presenter, Dr. Robinson-Spann, when I say how much we are looking forward to this discussion today. And it is indeed a discussion. Let me also say that if I were completing the phrase from earlier, I would say, because I am a longtime enrollment guy, I have indeed eaten my fair share of hot chicken nuggets in cafeterias across the high school and middle school landscape. It's been fun. What we seek to do in this presentation today is to do a data-rich deep dive in what is the happenings around Black students that are in our American school system. We're going to take this from a national perspective. We may have time to dive into what is happening Florida-centric, but we need you to really think about this in the aggregate. Our friends at SACAC are going to be driving the slides for us. And so why don't we begin? Let's go to the first slide. I talked a little bit about this. I also, by the way, want to point out that in those questions that you have at the end, please think about how does this information impact your work, your sphere of influence, and we'd love to be able to address that then. Next slide, please. All right, let's talk about the changing landscape, first of all. Please, next slide. There are a couple of takeaways from this particular slide that sets the stage for us. We cannot educate young people unless they are actually born into this earth realm, right? So there are a couple of things that we want to point out first. The first is that I want you to recognize that 18-year-olds today were born obviously in 2006. That's important because when you look at this slide, it begins at 2009. So effectively, this has been, since that time period of 2009, a decrease in the number of overall birth rates that's been happening in the US. The other thing I'd like to point out is that students that were indeed born in 2009, they are your freshmen that are in your hallways and in your school buildings today. They will be the entering class of 2027 into college. And the graduating class of 2030. Now, the reason that that's important is because that sets the context for what we're going to be talking about as we go through these slides, because there's a lot of futuristic talk. All right, a couple of other takeaways that are important here. Number one, 20 to 24-year-olds are the typical age in which Black women are having babies. A large percentage of them, and that is over a third, have that during that particular time period. That's important because that means that at the same time that they're having children would be a usual time that many of them would be in school. And so that can sometimes complicate their ability to be able to enroll. It also means that many of them are seeking to go into the workforce, and that means the amount of income that is able to raise that child and provide the kind of atmosphere for that proper child development. We'll see the impact of that as we go on. The other is that the number of children that these Black women tend to have is about 2.1 children in the home, contrary to popular belief, as it has been in the past, that homes of Black families are large in context of children. The actual data says that they are about 2.1. This idea of Black fatherhood is another takeaway that is important for us, whereas 60% of children live with their father. Black children live with their father. So fathers are engaged in the home in terms of their perspective and how they are influencing Black children. But this next point, about 25% living with grandparents. Now that's going to be important also because of the college going process and the conversations that are had with Black children around going to college, and the fact that grandparents are often involved in those conversations. The last two bullet points I just want to point out are just pertaining to the development, overall educational development of children. When you look at the socioeconomics of Black children in the majority today across the United States, they are challenged. And so what does that mean in terms of investment of those into the development, educational development of that child, the support of that child while they are in school? All of those things obviously have implications, especially when a third of Black children are born under the federal poverty line. Next slide, please. Now, This slide is meant to show the juxtaposition between where there are significant birth rates amongst Black children today and where those birth rates are going in the future. You'll see there on the left side of your screen that the majority of Black birth rates today are happening in the South. You'll notice there that the top 10 states where Black children are born are mostly within the southern region, with over 44%, according to 2019 data, being born in the District of Columbia, or at least 44% of the children within the District of Columbia being born as Black. That's important because it sets the stage to remember that Black migration started about 30 years ago from northern regions of the country, northeastern regions of the country, midwestern regions of the country. A reverse migration began to move back, with Black families moving back to the South. This reverse migration came from migration that took place out of the South in the 1930s and 1940s mainly, as part of the Jim Crow era, when jobs were more plentiful in the North, and because of the experience of Jim Crow in the South, many Blacks went in that direction, and that reverse has been happening over the last 30 years. With that said, however, if you look at the right side of the screen, because of technology, because of mobility, because of economic desire, you also have more Black families that are moving west and moving up to the Northwest. And so, moving to the West and to the Northwest. And so what you see there is now a shift in terms of what will be happening in the future in terms of the growth of Black children, or the births percentage of Black babies. Now, if this is one of the reasons why this is important, is because you, counselors, can expect that colleges and universities are going to begin recognizing this shift and begin to shift resources to these particular regions in order to continue to diversify their populations, especially in light of the SCOTUS decision that was recently made, as colleges now try to figure out how to more diversify top of funnel. Doesn't mean that Florida counselors will not get the attention that they need, or students will not get the attention that they need. But when you think about budgets of institutions and where they need to spend budgets and get the return on investment, there is likely going to be a national shift towards the West and upper Midwest and those areas, in order to garner more Black young people in their talent pools. Next slide, please. Now, on this slide, I wanted to point out the issues around Black graduation rates. There's no surprises here. We understand that Black children, Black students are being challenged in terms of graduating from high school. What this happens to do is it happens to paint the picture of what that truly looks like. As you can see there in the map of the United States, the darker blue areas talk about where the graduation rates are highest. The lighter areas and the striped areas talk about where they are lowest. As you can tell, the lowest graduation rates will be happening in the Midwest and happening in the upper Northeast. And the graph at the bottom exemplifies that. It shows that in the South, we do see significant rates increasing, numbers increasing over that time period between 2009 and 2010, 2012, 2013, 28, and 29. 2028, 2029, we'll see the increases there in the South and in the West, but the decreases in those areas. That is in direct correlation to what we saw in terms of the birth rates. So at the same time that you'll see these Black birth rates that are shifting towards the West and upper Northwest upper Midwest and so forth, there is also still reason for schools to be concerned about talent that is in the South. And that is why I said that you should not be overly concerned about there being a divestment in the attention that you would receive from colleges and universities, but there will certainly be more competition for the attention of those schools in terms of where the talent is being dispersed across the United States. On the next slide, we go further into the Black graduation rates. When we look at dropout rates, you can see that those dropout rates for Black students are consistent with dropout rates to the majority of race and ethnicities, except for Hispanic students, which are dropping at a much more strict rate compared to others. And you also look at the number of graduates. Black students are on par generally with that the majority of other students, except once again, in the case of white students that are graduating at a much higher rate, you'll see that it's a more dramatic decrease. However, in the case of Hispanic students, you'll see that those graduation rates are rising. What does this mean? Well, one of the implications is in terms of resource allocations within your buildings. What students are going to be coming through the doors more often, coming through your doors for assistance more often in terms of graduation. That has some implications on that. It also has implications in terms of as universities decide how best to diversify their populations, do they spend more time recruiting Black students versus recruiting Hispanic students versus recruiting any other students? As you might imagine, there will be more of an investment that schools are anticipating to make in Hispanic recruitment. That could mean a challenge for recruiting Black students and the attention that Black students might get from schools. So once again, while the talent is shifting across the United States, while there will be some talent that is remaining in the South, there is now heightened competition in terms of school resources, higher educational resources for recruitment in terms of between Black students and Hispanic students. And so that's going to be something that we'll need to be keeping our eye on. On the next slide, one of the things that I want to talk about now is in this idea about competition, it is also the idea of who is ready. And how do Black students stack up for their readiness to go to college? As these charts can explain to you, as far as how the ACT judges the ability of Black students to be prepared against all students, Black students are performing the lowest in these particular categories. You'll see there on the left, that in terms of composite scores for the core curriculum, if you want to know what the core is, you'll look over on the right bottom. It'll give you a sense of what the core courses are that they're judging. And then the core compared to non-core, in both areas, Black students are underperforming their peers. When you look at the score of readiness score in terms of how do all of these core courses stack up for a single score to talk about whether they're ready or not from a scale from in terms of whether they're ready or not, percentage-wise, in terms of 3s or 4s, which indicate that they're ready, percentage-wise, Black students, once again, are woefully below many of their peers. So there is the question here about readiness, and we understand that there are some beliefs in biasness in terms of the test, preparedness in terms of the test, the ability for Black students compared to others to be developed to take standardized tests, the exposure that Black students get or do not get in preparation to take tests, to take standardized tests. All of those are factors. But in terms of what it is, the standardization and how they then compare to their peers, the data is showing that they are behind. One final note on this, many of you may have already seen that Dartmouth just recently this week announced that it will reinstate the use of SAT and ACT scores for college admissions. This is huge because, as you know, we've been very much in a test optional environment here in the United States. Many schools have shifted to that. And so it is now that one of the leading Ivy League schools have determined that they are going back to standardized tests. that we now in higher education are going to have to decide, how do we react to that? Are they going to be a lone wolf in this, or are others going to come along? Are the Ivy League schools going to join the mix, or state flagship schools going to join in? And then for more smaller institutions, like those of us like Bethune-Cookman, we'll have to decide, how do we follow suit? What does that mean? And then what does the market mean to that? What do students, your students, in terms of who they choose to apply, to whom they choose to apply, what does the reinstatement of the ACT or SAT, if that should happen full scale, what would that mean in terms of who they choose to go to? And so these are questions particularly for Black students who, as you can see from a test perspective, have tended to score lowest. Next slide, please. Now, despite the fact that there are challenges that Black students are having, challenges in terms of birth rates, challenges in terms of where the talent is shifting across the United States, there is yet an aspiration that Black students still have to go to college. And that overall is an important factor. And the reason that is because traditionally, education has been seen as an important value in the Black community. In fact, because of Black History Month, I thought I would just share a quote from El Haj Malik El Shabazz. And for those of you who don't know who that might be, that's Malcolm X. He said, and I quote, "Education is our," meaning Black people, "passport to the future. For tomorrow belongs to the people who prepare for it today." His point is the same, and that is that Blacks have always embraced education as a way to matriculate into the middle class. So when you look at this data, you look at Black students being on par in terms of their expectation to go to college and their desire or want to go to college. The difference between the two are this. When you meet a student, a Black student in their freshman year, and you say, "Do you think that you want to go to college someday?" They say, "Absolutely. I want to go to college. It's what I would definitely desire to do." But then when you meet the same student in their senior year, after life has come on board, their family has chimed in, economics is being considered, the process itself and how difficult they may find it to be or not, that same question now is, do you expect to go to college? Is everything ready for you to go to college? You'll see that that number drops. It drops not just for Black students. You see that it drops for many of the students that are located on here. Look at the American Indian, Native, Alaska Native, and Indigenous students. You'll see an even greater significant drop between expecting, wanting to go and expecting to go. But the reason that this is important for Black students in particular is look at the bottom right of the screen. You'll see that there has been a drop from 2019 to 2023 from 79% who expect to go to college to 74%. Now that's important because, again, a high value has been in the Black community that you go to college. And yet we're seeing a decrease in that. And we know that during that time period has been the pandemic. That's been very significant in impacting that. We also know that there were over 22,000 Black students that fell out of the college going process during that period. Numbers even have been quoted even higher than that. We know that because of economic challenges, many Black students are having a difficulty getting back into the college going process, although the numbers suggest that there's enough swing. But this number is telling in terms of the attitude and the shift in attitude amongst Black students and Black families in terms of the value of education. And we'll see a little bit more of that in just a moment. I'm going to just go to the next slide here and just touch very quickly on to say that this focuses on more of the adult learner market when it comes to Blacks, and it just qualifies the same feeling if you look there in terms of how they feel about enrolling. You'll see that they outpaced most of their peers because, once again, the value of education is so critical and important. All right, with that said, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Dr. Robinson Spann, to continue this education. Dr. Spann.
So as AJ went over, the aspirations for Black students to attend college, next slide, please. And the expectation to attend college are very different things. But when you look at college enrollment for the class that came out in 2022 from high school, there isn't much difference between the Black expectation number that AJ showed you to who actually goes to college. And that's a number that has been growing over the last 20 years. So there's a lot of positivity in that. However, when you broaden out the group, so your graduating class, these kids are 17, 18, maybe 19, coming out of high school, making that transition to college within 6 months of graduating high school. When you broaden the scope to 18 to 24-year-olds, which generally includes people who are in college actively, you see that those numbers are a little bit different. Only about 36 to 37% of Black students who are 18 to 24-year-olds are enrolled in college. And when you compare that to other groups, it's pretty similar to the Hispanic group. White group is slightly higher, but the Asian group is where you see a larger majority of students being actively enrolled in college. So in my slides upcoming, I'm going to really go into kind of the various differences that may support these numbers and give you a little bit more context to understand what's happening. So as AJ described, there has been a shift in college going in terms of just raw numbers. Now, some of these numbers are tied to different cohort sizes from the different time periods. Each year, a different number of students graduates. It usually ranges around 3 million to about 3.3 million. So you can see kind of slight blips based on just 60% of a smaller number. However, we have observed different changes in not expectations, but kind of understanding the value of college and different types of programming. So that's why you can see some large number shifts for your different associate's program versus your bachelor's program. But overall, we've seen a drop in about 500,000 students in higher education from 2011 to 2019. And just to point out, historically Black colleges and universities who play an outsized role in enrolling and graduating Black students, you can see that they have also experienced different drops over different time frames. And this year, as 2022 and 2023, we are looking forward to increasing the numbers of college enrollment overall. Next slide, please. So the current data that is being collected for fall 2023 through different surveys, including the National Survey IPEDS, but also through the College Board's participation with the Common Data Set in the annual survey of colleges, is being collected now, so we do not have that data. But for fall 2022, you can see what Black enrollment looks like across sectors. Nationally, approximately 75% of students attend a public institution, and that is the same for Black students, compared to about 19% for private nonprofit and 6% for private for-profit for Black students. Across all the sectors, the majority of Black students do enroll in a 4-year program. And over the course of the pandemic, there was a lot of concern as to whether more Black students were attending for-profit institutions or switching their degree programs. And although we did see that in the 2019-2020 period, that number has gone back down, and we are now seeing more equal splits, more in alignment, splits that are more in alignment with previous years before the pandemic, with Black students getting 4-year degrees at nonprofit and or public institutions. Next slide, please. So when we look at 4-year enrollment, where are Black students going? If you remember the map that AJ showed you earlier, most Black students live in the Southeast area, and that is where the majority of students enroll. We do see a reasonable amount of migration. So there are students who are from the Northeast that attend school in the Southeast, but that is the primary area, and most kids do end up going to a school that is within their location. So these numbers pretty much align with where actual Black students are in terms of their percentages nationally. But as AJ mentioned, when we're thinking about the future of America and growth opportunities, many areas in the Midwest and the Northwest are now getting larger Black populations. So as a counselor and you're talking to a student, understanding kind of the various opportunities that now will be available in areas that were not traditionally large with Black populations are new things that you can start to think about. Like, what are the different programs and opportunities that are available in these new areas, and how will they respond to their growing Black populations to maybe make their campuses and their climates a little more open and accessible to Black students. So looking at status, so as AJ mentioned before, the Black kind of experience is a little bit different in the sense that when a kid is younger, they have these aspirations, but then when they get closer to graduation, a lot more expectations in real life hit. So what does that mean in terms of how they view their ability to fit education into their lives? So approximately 79% of Black students do attend college as a full-time student. 21% is part-time. That 21% is larger than the national average of 17%. So when we really look into these data, questions that I have are what are influencing the decisions of Black students? So what is the role of location and ability to commute to a school? What is the role of financing? And maybe they have to work to provide for themselves while they're in school. And these are the types of things that you as counselors would have more information about to help guide students in making the decision and identifying a program that best fits their needs. And then my role working with people like AJ is helping them to understand how to better support their students. What does packaging needs to look like? What is the ability to convert a part-time student to a full-time student? Because we do know that graduation time to completion, as well as just overall graduating at all, is heavily impacted by a student's status. Next slide, please. So when we talk about enrollment, I just really wanted to point out what Black distributions look like nationally. So a lot of people ask about HBCUs versus HWIs, which are historically white institutions, which may or may not be predominantly white. There are about 25% of historically white institutions that are predominantly minority due to Hispanic, Black, and Asian enrollment. But when you look at the approximately 2,000 four-year institutions that participate in the government's IPEDS data collection program, about 20% of full-time students who enroll in a program do so at a historically Black college or university. The other 80% does so at a historically white institution. So just to throw out some numbers to put this into context, there are only about 84 four-year HBCU schools. In comparison, there's almost 2,000 historically white institutions. So when you think about these splits, those 84 schools are enrolling a large proportion of Black students at the institutional level, whereas the large number of historically white institutions are not enrolling, usually at the individual level, a large proportion of Black students. And the next chart, you can see that among historically white institutions, only about 39%, and those are the ones in the blue, enroll at the national average level for Black people. It's about 13% or higher, while the other over 60% enroll less than the national average. And then when you go all the way down, over 300 enroll less than 1%, and almost 300 enroll absolutely no Black students. So when we're thinking about how to guide students in evaluating a college, it's really important to think about that campus climate and the experience that a student will have. And when we're thinking about the programs that will now expand their recruiting to incorporate more Black students in the light of the SCOTUS decision, helping students to really understand a program in terms of its demographics, its support and resources and opportunity is very important to help them pick a school that is the best fit for them academically as well as social and culturally. Next slide, please. So now I'm going to turn it back to AJ to go over Black higher education financing.
Thank you, Ashley. What we want you to understand is because Black students are committed in large part to pursuing an education, as we've shown, it is now the question of whether or not it can be afforded by them. Where that starts is assets. What do they bring to the table and their ability to be able to finance their education? As you can see on the left, that Black students compared to whites are generally in families that have lesser asset categories, making it difficult to come up with on-time cash to be able to afford their education. Therefore, a majority of Black students tend to borrow and borrow quite substantially in terms of affording their education. If you go to the next slide, please. If you look, therefore, at the percentage, or excuse me, the amounts that Black students are borrowing on average for their undergraduate study, you can see that it outpaced all of their peers at $22,005. That means an average loan repayment amount for them when they exit college that is also higher than their peers, further complicating their ability to be able to apply their degree to build a lifestyle for themselves and a nest egg that they can then hopefully pass on assets to their children. And with the challenge of that, that sometimes gets complicated and the situation can be reoccurring in that sense. What I also find interesting is that if you look at loan repayment in terms of the bottom right, you'll see payment status of student loans for own education among borrowers 18 to 39. You'll see that in terms of who's behind on payments, mostly it is Black students compared to their peers. So Blacks are going to borrow heavily because of the lack of assets and ability to bring that to the table on the front end. And they're also going to be challenged and much time because of job discrepancies that they face when graduating from college, the inability to be employed at a faster rate as their peers, the challenges with that, which is why career exploration within high school becomes so much more important for clarity of mind and also connecting that to where the student decides to go. And higher education institutions also being challenged by the federal government, which we should be, to talk more about outcomes and how we align our students' expectations with the outcomes that we provide. Next slide, please.
So
Now, Ashley?
So digging into kind of what these packages look like. So as AJ presented, Black students are more likely to have loans. And if you look at the historical data from 2019 to 20 academic year, packaging and financial aid by race, you can see that Black students overall, 88%, which is the highest across groups, received a package. But what type of package? So 55.7% received a Pell Grant, which is usually only allotted to students from low-income backgrounds. And then, 59.2% received a Pell Grant, and then 55.7% received a loan. So when we think about the ability to pay back, if a larger percentage of Black students are receiving a loan, then what does it take for them to be able to pay that loan back with completion of their degree or even not completing their degree? What jobs are available for them? Next slide. AJ, you can present this one.
Yep, sorry, I had to get myself off mute. So in terms of then, how does this impact how they go through their institution, because coming out on the other end is important in terms of their ability to get a return on investment. There are a few things that we wanted to point out that can stifle a Black student's ability to go through and be able to remain enrolled. One of them is we want to just point out the fact, if you go to the middle of the screen, to the bottom, emotional stress, personal mental health, cost of the degree. Those are the three highest factors that pertain to why Black students do not often finish their coursework. When in terms of what helps them to be able to do that, greater flexibility in the course delivery, we'll look at that in a few moments, about over 13 new different ways that courses are being developed and how Black students are able to take advantage of that. So this idea of being ready for college, paying for college, but then getting through college is all a part of the mix of what is affecting Black students now. Ashley?
All right, next slide, please. So when we think about graduation rates, most of the time when you see reported data is aggregated at the national level, but then they also split it by public and private and or by selectivity. But one way that I think is very important for us to really understand what outcomes look like is understanding a college's ability to graduate different kinds of students, particularly those from low socioeconomic backgrounds. So this chart shows you graduation rates from 2010 cohort to the most recent cohort that graduated in 2022. The graduation rates by the percentage of students that qualified for Pell. So when you look at it this way, I think we get a more nuanced story of what's really happening. The schools that are in green and blue enroll less than 25% of Pell eligible students. And those schools graduate their students at rates above 70, 75% annually. But once you get into a program that enrolls more than 25% of students, that's when your graduation rates begin to fall. So you see the 25% to less than 50%, they're still graduating their students above 50%. But once you get half of your class or more that are Pell eligible, you fall in graduation rates below 50% into the low 40s to high 30s. And those that enroll over 75% barely pass 30% of graduation rates. So when we're thinking about kind of what's happening to the students at these various types of campuses, it's really important to understand what supports are available, what financing and packaging looks like, what a student's ability to support themselves, to really get into kind of like the experience that impacts their ability to be successful. Next slide, please. So with that in mind, we saw the packaging for Black students. More Black students are on financial aid. Larger proportions of Black students are considered Pell eligible. What does that look like for Black graduation rates overall? Well, nationally, over 60% of students graduate from their four-year program within 6 years. And that number has ranged between 60 to 65% for the last 6 cohorts starting in 2010 and last 7 cohorts starting in 2010 and then ending in 2016. But for Black students, those numbers have generally only ranged between 42 and 45%. So now layering onto the ability of most schools to enroll and graduate low-income students, we can kind of think about the different influences that may impact Black students' ability to graduate. When you look at this chart on the left, you see the historically white institutions in general are more successful at graduating Black students. HBCUs, of which I mentioned there are only 84 four-year programs, do so in the low to mid 30s range annually. But when you think about the types of students that both schools support and the total numbers, HBCUs generally have larger proportions of Black students on campus, and most of those students, an average of 75%, are Pell recipients compared to historically white institutions where on average only 40% of their students are Pell eligible recipients. Next slide, please. So when we actually start to look at graduation rates by the percentage of Pell enrollment, we see a very different story. HBCUs, there are no HBCUs that enroll less than 25% Pell. The number is actually, I think the lowest was 40%. So when we actually begin to look at graduation rates comparing HBCUs, historically white institutions, HBCUs are actually very successful at graduating Black students when their Pell eligibility enrollment is between that 25% to less than 50%. A lot of institutions get their students out above 50% into that 60%. Whereas historically white institutions usually do so at that 54 to 55%. When we get to even larger Pell percentage, graduation rates still only reach about 38 to mid 40s%. And then it gets even lower when the larger proportions are Pell eligible. But the main point is there's something happening on HBCU campuses that historically white institutions can learn from. So as a counselor, it really is important to think about the cultural aspects and the wraparound services and other supportive aspects that are offered on different types of campuses when you're guiding your students into their college search process and their final enrollment decision. It's really important to think about the types of experiences that they will have so that they're able to be successful. And I think really understanding the different conversations that you can have with your students to encourage additional thought beyond traditional reputation or location or even packaging with the college selection process is really important for getting them to think more dynamically about the type of experience they have to be successful. Next slide, please. So what does this all mean? So AJ showed you a bunch of data about financing, students making decisions about being retained and like the importance of the expectations and aspirations. And then I showed you information about graduation rates at the institutional level. But when we think about long-term outcomes, it's really important for us to think about what it means for a student's employability and their ability to be successful outside of college. So the data here are the National Bureau of Labor Statistics data, where we can see educational attainment outcomes. So for 18 to 24-year-olds across the board for the nation, approximately 75% of students that are in college are obtaining a degree. They haven't completed their program. And this number is actually lower than the number of Black students between 18 to 24-year-olds. 83% are attaining a degree. 10% have achieved their degree as Black students, where 17% have done so for the nation. And then that associate's degree are pretty much the same. So we can see here that is a slight difference in earning a complete degree, but we have full expectations that the majority of the 83% who are obtaining some college will complete a degree, whether it's 2 years or 4 years, within the next couple of years. However, when we expand that group again from 24-year-olds to 25 years and older, we can see the impact of Black students not being retained and graduating within 6 years. So whereas 50% for the nation of students who obtained some kind of educational post-secondary experience, 50% graduate with a bachelor's degree and 13% graduate with an associate's degree. In comparison, among the 25-year-olds and over for Black students who had some type of post-secondary experience, only 36% finished with a degree and a 4-year degree, and 15% finished with a 2-year degree. So that means 49%, almost half of Black students that had some type of post-secondary experience did not come away from their program with a degree. So when we think about the ability to pay back a loan, the ability to get a job in a certain sector, These are the types of experiences in colleges and the types of outcomes that influences the marketability and competitiveness of Black students. So these are the types of things that we can really start to think about to help encourage Black students to work on preparation, to work on college search and employability searches before they're getting into their post-secondary program so they can graduate and be successful and more competitive down the line.
Thank you, Ashley. Now, we've established a foundation in terms of the changing landscape. How do trends lay on top of this? Well, we want to start by talking about that we are in a very different space today in terms of higher education than where we have been before. But it is not new in terms of the evolution of higher education. You can see here from the colonial colleges that started in the 19th century, to the more modern research institutions that came along in the 20th century, and even this idea of comprehensive institutions that began in the 1960s. Higher education is always evolving, and we are in the midst of an evolutionary period now. Next slide. And so what we have to pay attention to is as we go through this revolution, how is it that the market is actually reacting to this? So we look at it on several factors. First, economic factors, where we look at the fact that the revenue of institutions are very much causing this revolution. The fact that institutions are not making the level of net tuition revenue that it has in the past. And that has a correlation on what we will see in a moment to what the market feels is the value of education. We look at demographics. We've just spent quite a bit of time looking at the shifting of demographics for Black students, but we also recognize the fact that there has been shifting amongst other types of students as well, both on the undergraduate level as well as in the graduate level. And then, as I said, we've got the market in terms of what they are desiring, and that has opened up the door for more for-profit offerings that are coming as well. And so all of this is mixing into why institutions are developing themselves into something that is more readily acceptable by the market. Next slide. So in terms of how a student gets the coursework, gets what it is that they need, that is definitely becoming multifaceted. And what is driving that too is a student's ability to say yes and say no. For those of you who have been in counseling for some time, particularly if you have been in college counseling for a while, you understand that it has certainly changed in terms of the options that students have and how they are able to obtain what it is that they want and get themselves out into the workforce. Next slide. And so here you have 15 examples of different innovations that have come on within the last 20 years to allow a student to be able to access education after high school and to be able to prepare themselves for the workforce. Now, if you look at this, these are all options, not just for students who are in certain socioeconomic conditions, but all students. And so therefore, what does it mean now for a Black student when they're thinking about that 74% that are going to college, thinking about it, what options do they have? How can you begin to direct them? Is the 4-year education, is the 2-year education, is the certification, is the trade school? Do you do a credit on demand? There are a number of different options now that we begin to have. And by the way, I believe, and many others, excuse me, in the higher education space believe that this is a short list, and that the list is going to continue to change as institutions continue to evolve themselves to meet the market demand. Next slide. Now, That market demand is driven largely by the lack of confidence, or rather the amount of confidence that the market has in the value of higher education. And how can that educational degree get them what it is that they need? You'll see that over the last couple of decades, there's been a challenge to whether or not higher education is, in fact, that only mechanism, or rather that traditional mechanism to acquire a better lifestyle or the American dream. And some of the challenges that have been made to that is that graduation rates from institutions have been dropping in some instances. In terms of outcomes and how students are coming out prepared and getting a job, that has been a challenge. There's been this idea that the liberal arts itself as a concept, a higher education concept and delivery, is not adequate enough, and that instead of spending time in a liberal arts curriculum, students should go straight to the practical coursework that can deliver them employment. And so all of that is combining for a drop in the confidence of higher education. That too is now more on the minds of Black students than it has been before. Again, go back to that 79% drop to the 74% drop. And this is an important point, because as we all are engaging with these students, we also have to consider the fact that that grandparent that they may be living with, or that father that may be involved in their lives, as we talked about earlier, or that younger mom that we know about, they're thinking about these issues as well, especially if you juxtapose it against the socioeconomic issues that we talked about that students are facing, and how they can get ready cash into the home faster, more, better, faster. So that challenges their view of whether I should even spend time going to college. Is this even worth my investment of time, especially if I'm going to come out with a higher loan debt indebtedness? Next slide. So customers are becoming more judicious in their college selections. Things like price are becoming more of a question than before. This is in part why you see a shift in students considering HBCUs over HWIs because of the price point and the affordability amongst those schools. There's also something to be said about cultural nuances, which Dr. Spann talked about just a moment ago. But in terms of how does education that's at the right price point translate to preparation for after college is becoming a greater question in the household of Black students than ever before. Next slide. Here, we just see some comparative data in terms of why students are saying, if I go, here are the things that I'm thinking are going to be important to me. Reasons to consider continuing your education, like knowledge and skills, of course, but also this personal fulfillment of achievement, how to get a higher paying job that's very high on the list, as you can see that, preparement for a career, being more competitive for a job. The next point is about a job as well. So the first 5 reasons, the majority of those reasons have to do with employment. And that is very, very important for all students, especially those that have stopped out, those that have never even enrolled or that may be thinking about going on to college. So the point here is that the market itself is becoming far more critical, far more judicious. You can expect that even though they may not have the words to articulate their feelings about going to college and why they feel what it is that they feel, what is happening across the Black diaspora in the United States is a more judgmental attitude about the benefits of higher education and why they should deliver it. Not to say that that is not happening in other cultures, other race, other ethnicities, but we're here today to talk about whether or not that is in fact happening amongst the Black population. And you can see from the data that in fact it is. Next slide, please. Now, in terms of how this translates as to continuing education, you can see that we wanted to just end this by just showing you how this appears across different demographics in terms of age, in terms of degree, in terms of parental status. Look at what's happening in the urban core. That 44% outpaces that in the suburban in terms of why they would consider an education in terms of an excellent investment. That goes back to that 79 to 74%. So once again, we see high value in that in terms of people people, many of whom are within that urban core. So the value proposition is still salient, but it's being challenged. It is definitely being challenged today. So we wanted to juxtapose those 2 points so that you can have those as bookends as you're talking about and as you're working with Black students and thinking about what could be happening in their households. Yes, we traditionally think that education is something that is very important, but we have newer questions today than what we had before, and we need answers to those questions because it mainly being, is this the right type of investment for us to ultimately get you where you want to go? Next slide, please. Now, we just want to spend just a moment talking about the trends, the winning strategies in terms of what we're thinking about on a higher education level. We won't spend the time actually going too deep in how admissions officers are grappling with how to deal with Black students, especially in light of what has happened in the affirmative action decision by the Supreme Court. But I do want you to know that higher education officials across the spectrum, whether at historically white institutions or historically Black institutions, are thinking about how to do more with less students that are looking at that they would have access to, rather. They've becoming more creative on how to access Black students. And one of the things that they're doing is making certain that they have a very clear profile on where Black students exist. And so if you go to the next slide, I wanted to just give you a snapshot on how some of that thinking operates behind the scenes. Think of this as how the sausage is being made. What you see in front of you is a heat map that outlines the distribution of density of Blacks throughout the United States based on census data. It is cross-referenced with information that I had as I served as lead enrollment officer at Howard University. You'll see that we plotted where are our Howard alumni chapters across the United States. Why? Because we know that Howard alumni in their various communities are our brand. They are going to be sitting next to Black students in church. They are going to be the doctor that examines them. They are going to be the lawyer that fights their case. And so the Howard brand, knowing where it is playing out across the United States, was very important to us. And then we also overlaid that with where are affluent Blacks living throughout the U.S., where are more affluent school districts are throughout the U.S. Why? Because we know that those are going to be more college-going families. And so that we want to make certain that we're keeping them in the mix and keeping them in the loop as we're thinking about the decreases that we're going to face in certain other parts of the United States and the need to continue net tuition revenue high at our institutions. All of this mixes together for us to be able to define the student that we want to go after and where we want to place our investments. Think about all the demographic information I showed you at the beginning. It allows us from that to this to be able to think about how we want to go after Black students, how do we ensure that we continue to diversify, and who, like you, we should be talking to in the various areas of the country. Next slide, please. That leads me to a study that we did here at Bethune-Cookman, where we take what I just showed you and we underlay it with, therefore, who is today our profile student? Who is coming to us at the university? And so when we look at all of the demographics that we have collected on a student, including questions that we asked them on the admitted student survey of why you chose Bethune-Cookman and other factors like it, you'll see that we're able to create a certain profile of who is that typical student that will come and enroll here. And for us, our data says that she is heterosexual female. She is African-American Black. She is generally coming to us as a traditional student of 18. As a first-time college student. She comes to us with a GPA of 3.1 to 3.4 from high school. She is generally coming from about a 150-mile radius out of an urban core, likely. She is most likely a Floridian. The majority of our students are. She's active in leadership in her high school. We see that from her application. We are heavy on allied health majors, also business and psychology, but she's likely coming in as one of those top 3. She's non-military, non-athletic. She is a Christian. She identifies with our Christian ethos here at Bethune-Cookman, and she's looking for an HBCU experience. That is very high on her list, very important to her. She wants to have that cultural experience, and she wants to be in a small atmosphere. What I don't have listed on here, but is also important for us to note, is that she is able-bodied. Lastly, what we also know on the next slide, please, is that while she is our profile student, she is not our primary customer. Who do I mean? We know that our primary customer is her mother, that Black mother, African-American, mid-40s, generally unmarried. Go back to the data that we talked about before. She too is coming from that 150-mile radius. From an income level, this is what we know from our FAFSA data. In terms of the average income for us, she does have multiple children in college. She those go back to that 2.1 children. She tended to have them close in age. She believes in the importance of education. Again, go back to what we talked about earlier in terms of the value of education amongst the Black community. She's generally familiar with the legacy of BCU and with Dr. Mary McLeod Bethune because of the role that she plays in Black history. And then also, she is not as familiar, however, with the college going process. And so we have to be very clear in our ability to be able to help her. These are the kinds of things that we are thinking about from a higher education perspective that lead us in how we engage with your students, how we go after them, and what are the strategies that we put in place in order to deal with them and get them in our particular talent pool. This brings us to the end of our presentation. We want to thank you very much for your patience with us as we walk through this very meaty slide deck, and we look forward to questions that you may have at the end. So thank you very much.
Absolutely. I am over here just giving you all the praise. That was an excellent data-driven presentation. I have copious notes, but I do want to make a point really quick. I've had several people email and also put in the chat that they want to know if this presentation is going to be available afterwards. It most certainly is. It is being recorded. So if you were interrupted during that awesome presentation, or if you had to step away for whatever reason, you will be able to go back and it will be accessible to you on SACAC's website and our YouTube channel as well. So thank you both for a dynamic presentation. And I'm excited because I do see a question or two in the chat directed to you in your presentation that we will again at the end circle back to make sure we have some engaging conversation. Excellent. Just as a shameless plug really quickly, Corey shared that there are some amazing benefits to being a part of SACAC, but I'm not sure if we shared what SACAC is, and it stands for the Southern Association for College Admissions Counseling. And SACAC is basically an organization that supports professionals who support students. So all of you. And right now is the perfect time to join SACAC because it's free. So you guys can join as a free access member if you're at a public school. That information can be located on our website. If you see our SACAC website, and we'll make sure that we share that in our follow-up, but we want you to be a member. We'll also share a little bit more about our upcoming conference, but there is an awesome opportunity for you to network with other counselors as well as other professionals on the higher ed side. Now, we're going to move on to our second session with none other than the man, the myth, the legend, Mr. Pete Hernandez. Pedro Pete Hernandez is the current Director of Outreach Services for the Florida Department of Education, Office of Student Financial Assistance, or OSFA, in charge of the federal loan portfolio, as well as the nearly 30 state of Florida scholarship and grant programs. Pete has been with the agency in this role since 2009. Pete Hernandez graduated from Florida State University with a bachelor's degree in international affairs with an emphasis in economics. Pete has over 20 years in financial aid experience, and that is why he's the man, the myth, and the legend. So I'm excited to turn it over to FAFSA to get to Pedro to give us some FAFSA updates and information as we navigate this new season. Pete, it's all yours.
Thank you, Monique, and thank you everyone for joining us this morning. Yes, my presentation is going to be forthcoming, a lot of great information, and we absolutely look forward to answering a lot of your questions because we do have sometimes more questions than answers at this time, but we will proceed to answer as many as possible. As you can see, this presentation is geared primarily for the 23-24 high school graduate going into the 24-25 post-secondary academic year, but also we will cover what if the student is, upon immediate high school graduation, enrolling in summer school because that would make him a 23-24 FAFSA applicant, and therefore they would have to fill out 2 FAFSA applications. But we'll cover that shortly as well. So one of the first things that I want to do, and when it comes to financial aid, when we talk to parents, when we talk to counselors, we in financial aid have our own language and use a lot of our acronyms. The very first lesson that I want to teach and incur in everyone is that if you do not understand a term, a concept, an acronym, please stop us in the financial aid office and ask us to explain exactly what that means. For example, you're going to come across cost of attendance, the FAFSA submission summary, which is now the FSS, SAI, which used to be the EFC, FAFSA, the FSAID, IRS data retrieval tool, or the recognition now that you are granting them access to directly have the Department of Education pull your tax information. So we do have a lot of great information out there, but one of the first and primary lessons is that if you do not understand a term or concept, or your students or parents don't understand a term or concept, please have them stop us and ask us in regards to that. Because as we all know, the only bad question is the one question that is not asked. Next slide. So what are we going to cover today? As always, fundamentally, we're going to go over what is financial aid, where do you find financial aid, when and how to apply, and who could actually help you with the financial aid process. Next slide. So first and foremost, what is financial aid? So financial aid in general, it is money from all 4 major categories or 4 major resources. That is first and foremost for the federal government or the U.S. Department of Education is the first source. Secondly, the state that you reside in. In this case, in the state of Florida, we have over $1 billion in state financial aid or state scholarship and grants and additional programs that we cover. Institutional financial aid. That means money that comes directly from the college, university, or technical center, or your school itself. And then private scholarships. When it comes from private donors going to private institute to students, that is also a source of financial aid, and it is considered financial aid. Now, it is also important to notice that money such as financial aid can also be classified as gift aid, what are gifts, things that are free, money that does not have to be repaid back. Self-help financial aid, such as student loans and college work-study programs, are considered self-help, helping those students help themselves. Need-based financial aid, based on the FAFSAs and the EFC or SAI, which takes into consideration the financial status of the family. And then merit-based scholarships and grants, things such as academic scholarships, traditional scholarships, mainly those that the student is very specific in terms of meeting certain requirements, and those are merit-based scholarships. Now, all of those categories can be and are underclassified under financial aid. So basically, and what we always want to encourage to students and parents, because still we are fighting that perception that financial aid is only need-based scholarship, money that is given based on financial need. But as you can see, financial aid covers an entire array of sources. Next slide, please. Now, first and foremost, federal money. Let's define it a little better. When it comes to federal aid, we are talking about Pell Grants, SEOGs, work-study program, and student loan programs. Those are all sources of financial aid when it comes to the federal source. It is one of the largest sources of financial aid for all institutions, whether that's state, in-state, out-of-state, private institution, public institutions. Majority of all financial aid is going to come from the federal source. Next slide, please. When it comes to state aid, so things as here in the state of Florida, we have things such as the Benequisto Scholarship, Bright Future Scholarship, work-study programs, effective access. As you can see, just like federal aid, we have a variety of need-based financial aid, merit-based financial aid, and special programs. So I just still want to convey that even though we have 4 major sources of financial aid: federal, state, institutional, and private. Even with those sectors, there's a variety of both gift aid, need-based aid, merit aid, special and special needs for specific scholarships and grants. Next slide. So institutional financial aid. Once again, majority of institutional financial aid, but not all, is provided by students filling out their FAFSA application. This gives the institutions the ability to evaluate the student on a multitude of factors. For example, where they're from, their academic, their specific major, and it gives the institution additional ability to provide additional monies for those specific institutional funds that the institutions have. And that's whether they're colleges, universities, or technical centers, private, out of state, in state. All institutional funds, once again, majority of them are assessed or evaluated once a student fills out a FAFSA application. Not necessarily all, but once again, a majority of them. Next slide. When it comes to private sources, as we know, private sources, when it comes to private scholarships, come from a majority of sources. U.S. counselors have a list of private donors giving money to individuals that are attending your high schools at this present time. Same thing with colleges and universities. If you go on any school's financial aid page, you're going to see the link for scholarships. That is private donors giving money to students for that specific institution. Once again, it is a source of financial aid for a majority of students. Unfortunately, a lot of students do not take advantage of this, and therefore we have millions and millions of dollars of unused private scholarship money because simply students do not apply. We want to encourage them, and we want to let them know that yes, ultimately that these resources in terms of private scholarships are available, but it requires the student to either fill out a special application, go through the process, but these monies are out there. Once again, unlimited amount of private scholarship money that is available to all students. But once again, ultimate responsibility falls on the students, on the parents to submit and complete not only the private information, but also all financial aid information. Next slide. So college costs, as we know, when it comes to college costs, it's going to vary from institution to institution. It's going to vary whether it's an in-state institution or an out-of-state campus that you're attending. It's going to vary whether you're living on campus or off campus. Even though the schools do not have that information now on the FAFSA, that the schools are going to be implementing this, manners in which they can compensate and receive that information. Now, when it comes to assessing college cost of attendance equals the direct cost plus indirect cost. But just like every institution now is required to have what's called a net price calculator on their website, this is a valuable tool on accessing information on what it may truly cost that student to go to that institution. So it is a very valuable tool that every school, post-secondary institution, whether it's state, private, in-state, out-of-state, is required to have a net price calculator. Next slide. Now, based on College Board's information, this is a little dated here, but on average, when it comes to going in the state of Florida, or in-state for a two-year institution, on average nationally is about $3,700. Here in the state of Florida, it's just a little less than $3,000. In terms of going to a public in-state institutions, on average, just tuition and fees we're talking about here, is about a little over $10,000. Here in the state of Florida, we're averaging between $7,000 and $8,000. When it comes to an out-of-state institution, as you can see, the price triples. And when it comes to private institutions, on average nationwide, that figure is about $37,000, a little over $37,000. Once again, we are going to be updating this slide based on new information provided by the College Board, which provides great and phenomenal information when it comes to national information. Now, where do students apply for financial aid? They filling out the FAFSA is one of the very most important things. It is one of the basic building blocks for a lot of information. Here in the state of Florida, we have a Florida financial aid application. Now, this is a requirement for some of our merit-based scholarships and our specific scholarships. So every state might have, for high school, specifically for high school seniors, a specific state application that is required or might be mandated for very specific scholarships. So here in the state of Florida, by a student filling out both the FAFSA and the Florida financial aid application, they then are going to be evaluated for all federal funds, all state funds, and all institutional funds. And then when it comes to the fourth source, when it comes to private scholarship, it's going to be up to the student to apply independently at their high school, at their college, online, within their sectors for all private scholarship information. Now, And after that, if the school specifically is a school that requires a CSS profile, that please complete that application, because those institutions, in addition to the traditional financial aid process, because of their endowments and because of all additional resources from that institution, by filling out the CSS profile, it gives students the ability to be evaluated for further funds from that institution. Not all schools require the CSS profile, but if your school does, have the students definitely complete that in a timely manner. Now, we have, once again, additional sources and private scholarship sources. Make sure that they apply to those as well. Next slide. Now, when it comes to the free application for federal student aid, just want to make sure that it is not mandatory, but once again, if the students want to be evaluated, this is an application that must be submitted annually for the financial aid offices to evaluate the students for all federal funds, all state funds, and a majority of all institutional funds. Next slide. Now, this year, as we all know, we had the FAFSA simplification. We have a brand new look of what the FAFSA looks like, so and an experience as well. So this is the homepage of the new FAFSA. It will guide the student through the entire process. Next slide. So when it comes to getting started, there's a lot of important information to understand, but it is also nowadays with the critical changes, specifically this year. Next year, they've indicated that the FAFSA will open up on October 1st for the upcoming year. But this year, with the drastic change of FAFSA being changed, FAFSA is currently available, and students and parents are able to fill that out. Now, for the past month, those applications were just being housed, and then they were going to be processed sometime after January 31st. Once that processing is taking place for those students that filled that out in January, and those students filling it out now, the student will then, upon FAFSA being processed, the students will receive an email stating that their application has been processed and the outcome of that application. They will also notify the student if, for example, in January, they submitted an application and it is incomplete. Now, upon processing and upon receiving this email, they'll receive the notification that their application is incomplete, to please log in and complete their FAFSA application, or complete a parental section of the application. Now, remember, a lot of students need to absolutely, specifically during this year and going forward, need to be reading information accurately and following through, because as we all know, completing the FAFSA application makes the students eligible for a lot of federal funds, state funds, and institutional funds. But the applications have to be complete. So what we're highly recommending is completely monitor both those communications, but also communicate with the institutions, with your college universities, about specific financial aid priority deadlines, because they are very important. Now, as always, the FAFSA considers the students through their FAFSA questions and answer, or dependency wizard, financial aid dependency wizard. They're going to determine whether the student is dependent or independent. That makes a significant difference. If the student is deemed a dependent student through FAFSA purposes, they are then going to now notify the student to email their parents, and the parent will then have the opportunity to come in, log in, type in their information, and also now grant the U.S. Department of Education the ability to them go directly to the IRS and pull their tax information. Remember, we're still pulling tax information from prior year. Now, if the student is deemed an independent student, the student does not need any parental information whatsoever. The majority of the dependency questions are now through the FAFSA itself, like it was before, but now it's just going to automatically proceed and not indicate that the student does not need any parental information. As always, now the FAFSA you could implement, and we highly advise all students to submit all the schools that they have in mind of attending. As you know, once this application is processed, it will be communicated to all of those institutions. And upon what normally happens is, upon the admissions process, the student applies for a school, gets admitted. The school will then match up that admissions paperwork to hopefully that already existing financial aid paperwork, and that's going to trigger or generate what's called an award notification, or now sometimes mentioned as an offer of financial aid. The student then, depending on how many schools the student is looking at, can verify if they are indeed going to that institution, an estimated award amount of what they would receive at that institution. These estimated award or financial aid award notifications are once again estimates until the actual student enrolls and attends that institution. Next slide. Now, apparent purposes, once again, a lot of the actual documentation or the logic behind this is a legal parent is only going to be a parent who is a biological parent, a parent whose name is listed on the birth certificate. So therefore, aunts, uncles, foster parents, sisters, widows, they are not considered parents for FAFSA purposes if they do not meet the technical legal parent definition. Next slide. So it's also going to go through the marital statuses. Now, this is a different change because in the past, when students submitted their FAFSA, they were asked which parent they lived with the greatest amount of time. Any student that lived with a parent, when it comes to parents who are divorced or legally separated, the parent that the student lived with for 51% or greater time, that was deemed the parent for FAFSA purposes. That is no longer the case. When the student is submitting their FAFSA application, they will be asked several questions. And the dependency wizard and the parental wizard are then going to identify which biological parent, even in cases of divorced parents, the student must utilize to fill out the FAFSA application. Then the student will transmit the biological parent's information, and then that biological parent is required to fill out the FAFSA application. Once again, this is a drastic change from the previous FAFSA versions, but it is the process that is being implemented as we speak. So it's going to consider, when it comes to parents, whether they're married, remarried, divorced, or separated, it's going to go through the parental wizard once again, but it's going to identify it, and then the student is required to have information such as date of birth, email address, and social security number for those biological parents, so that the system can generate an email to send to that biological parent, so the parent can submit their information there. Now, if the parent is there with the student can't, the parent or the student can log into the FAFSA, login information, and submit that information as well, and they can transmit, and they'll match it up, and the FAFSA will be complete for dependent students who have student information and parental information. Next slide. Now, when it comes to the FAFSA, it used to be the FAFSA used to have, well, it's absolutely incorrect there on the title slide, but just notice that when it comes to the FAFSA, now in the past, when a student completed the FAFSA and everything was granted, the student would automatically receive what's called a student aid report, which is now the FAFSA summary submission. That information was generated within 2 to 3 days, and that information was transmitted to the schools. That information is now, once again, upon going forward, the students should start receiving their FAFSA submission summaries 3 to 5 days with all their information on it. Once that is completed, make sure that they check it, make sure that all the information is correct, because having corrected information alleviates the colleges and universities and technical centers from reprocessing this application, and having this application processed correctly, quickly, and expedites the financial aid process for a lot of students, considering that this year, the colleges, universities, and technical centers are going to be receiving their ICERs sometime in mid to late March. So just want to make sure that when even the student submits a FAFSA application, they may receive their FAFSA submission summary, but the schools themselves are going to receive those results in March and mid-March or late March. So just want to make sure that you are aware of that, and then schools will then take that time, build a financial aid package for the students, and provide it to the students after they receive the ISR, starting in mid to late March. Next slide. So additional information. One of the most important things that, like in previous FAFSAs, a FAFSA application does not accurately reflect a student's economic situation at times because of harsh economic impacts. different financial circumstances. If that is the case, still, no matter what, have the students complete the FAFSA information. If the student needs to have parental information submitted, have them submitted. If the student, once again, has any financial hardship, any financial critical situation, or the FAFSA does not truly reflect the current economic situation of the student, students or their parents have the right but they have to self-identify with the financial aid office at their institution, and they could ask under professional judgment to, once again, depending on their circumstances, be reviewed on a one-on-one basis based on their individual circumstances. This is now going to be the process like it was last year, like it was in previous years, but the vital and important thing to note is that students' parents need to or have the right to self-identify with the financial aid office and be reevaluated under professional judgment. Now, depending on the circumstances and the documentation that needs to be provided, 99.9% of the financial aid offices go above and beyond to award the student based on their current situation, based on the documentation that the students provide. So once again, vitally important that even though the FAFSA can be completed, if it does not reflect that, have students and parents self-identify with the financial aid offices at the institutions. Next slide. If this now, additional things. If the student is chosen for verification or if parents are chosen for verification, does that mean that they did anything wrong? Absolutely not. The U.S. Department of Education and schools themselves at random choose different students or a different set of population of students to actually confirm their information is being processed correctly. What that means is that for that student and for that family, the financial aid process has stopped and they have communicated with the student what specific documents they need to complete to have their FAFSA, their financial aid package completed at that institution. Until those requirements are met, that processing of the financial aid package has halted. So it's important that if a parent is chosen for verification, in a timely manner, complete and compile all the required documentations provided to the financial aid office, follow up, make sure that everything has been submitted correctly, and then the process can continue, and therefore the student can then be awarded their financial aid package in a timely manner. Once again, that students understand that when it comes to communicating, colleges, universities, whether it's on the financial aid side, admission sides, housing side, they are constantly communicating and responding, because nowadays, when it comes to students, they are now being treated like young adults. And like young adults, if they are not communicating and not completing their information, they could be losing out on their admission slot at a certain institution. They could be missing out on a financial aid scholarship or grant from a specific institution. So it is vital that the student is in constant contact. And now, one of the biggest things that I always get asked is, how does schools, colleges, universities, technical centers, how do they start awarding, or how do they compose the financial aid package? Well, this formula is very simple. They take the cost of attendance of an institution minus the SAI, or the student aid index, and what's left is what's called the net financial need. That is the financial gap that schools are trying to fill with as much free money from scholarships and grants from all sources, whether that's federal, state, or institutional. Then, if the student has either a prepaid, they apply that, or vice versa. So you have to check with your institutions on what method they have at specific institutions. But normally it's one of those. And then after all the scholarships and grants that they can award, then they start awarding federal loans in the process of, first and foremost, awarding subsidized loans. That means that the student is awarded a loan. It is money that has to be repaid back, but the student is not responsible for the principal or the interest until they graduate. Then they award an unsubsidized student loan. That means the student is not responsible for the principal, but they are responsible for the interest. However, if the student elects, they could have the interest payment deferred until they graduate. That does add the additional cost of adding interest on top of interest for the period that the student is in school. But that is an option that the student has. And then the student is granted, if there's still additional need, a parent loan. Now, the parent loan is different from the subsidized and the unsubsidized loan in the fact that the parent is a credit-based product. If the parents do not pass the credit-based criteria to receive a parent loan, parent plus loan, the student is awarded an additional $4,000 in an additional unsubsidized loan. And if there's additional needs, a majority of schools have private loans or private alternatives to continue to fill in that gap. Now, this is a very simplified way of looking at it, but in general, this is how, in general, financial aid packages are built. Next slide. Now, in Florida, we have a Florida financial aid application that has an opening date that was similar to the opening date for we have that information readily available. So our state application did open up. And once again, just like other states might have a state application, make sure that your students are aware that these are two separate applications, both the federal application, which is the FAFSA, the free application for federal state, and the Florida financial aid applications, or the other state applications that's for your states. Make sure that they understand that there are two separate applications with two significant deadlines for each application. But the benefits of submitting both is that the student is truly evaluated for all federal funds, state funds, and institutional funds. That's how we handle it here in Florida. Other states could be differently, but we found it that it's very similar in other states as well. Next slide. Once again, in the state of Florida, this is where we would communicate where our website is. We're at Florida Student Financial Aid, sg.org. We have all our information, as well as all of our state scholarships and grants on the right-hand side with their fact sheets and how to qualify for each. But once again, by having the students submit the FAFSA and the Florida Financial Aid, they're evaluated for all these need-based scholarships. The next slide. All the tuition assistance scholarships and grants. And next slide. All our merit-based information, merit-based scholarships. And next slide. And next slide as well. And all of these other scholarships and grants. Once again, the financial aid process when it comes to this year or years going forward normally consists of those factors. Next slide. Now, when it comes to private scholarships, it is a fourth, but also it could be one of the most lucrative sources of financial aid for students. Make sure that your students are applying. Every year we have millions and millions of dollars in private scholarship money. Make sure that is available to students. But once again, it's going to require the students to go out there and apply to these private scholarships, whether they're at their high school, whether they're at where their parents or the students are employed, whether they're at special social organizations or religious organizations at their institutions, or the colleges and universities. Once again, their websites are going to have scholarship links. Their programs of study are going to have possibly for private scholarships. All of these are sources for private scholarship. But once again, the student will have to go out individually based on the criteria for those scholarships, submit applications or submit additional documentation to be considered for those private funds. Once again, very lucrative that they can augment the student's financial aid package. Next slide. There are numerous national organizations such as College Board, Navigating Your Future, that have additional financing information on how to finance the college education. Please make sure that you are aware of it. There are multiple, the more information that we provide up there for students and parents to understand, the better it is. Next slide. So just quickly review and monitor the applications. Make sure that you're creating an FSA ID and password to sign it. When it comes to state applications, make sure that you are submitting those state applications. Make sure that you are, in the case of here in Florida, make sure that you are meeting Bright Futures, which is our big scholarship, our merit-based scholarship, and graduation requirements, because you still have to graduate, and make sure in order to attend those institutions, because yes, they can go back if you do not meet certain criteria. They can retroactively go back and rescind offers of financial aid or offers of admissions into institutions if you do not graduate. And when it comes to private scholarships, apply. When it comes to the CSS profile, if your institution requires that CSS profile, make sure that you submit it, because it is, once again, a great resource, financial resource for institutions that have that profile that is so that is not, it is not mandated, but once again, very, very good resource tool for students attending those institutions. And if you have any additional requests, make sure that you follow up and make sure that you ask questions and concerns. That leads us to the next slide. So who can help you? Here in the state of Florida, we have the U.S. Department of Education. This is their main website. Now, we are aware that they have had issues and they are overwhelmed with the number of calls in regards to the current FAFSA application. When it comes to colleges, universities, financial aid staff, locally, regionally, you have multiple schools at your institutions that regionally you're close by. You can actually walk into any financial aid office and ask a financial aid question, even if it's not pertinent to that school, and get it answered. But more importantly, go ahead and ask the financial aid offices at the schools that your students or parents are attending to make sure you get those financial aid questions asked. When it comes to, high school counselors, we first and foremost thank you, because you guide your students over and over and over again to the right resources. But unfortunately, we cannot make them do stuff. Ultimately, the ultimate responsibility lies with the student and the parents to complete this information, but they are there. But also students can reference myself. Next slide. I am, as the Director of Outreach Services, I'm responsible to not only now for all Florida counselors, but now all your organizations as well. This is my direct contact information, our department's 188 line and our email. But you could always contact me directly for any question, concern that you may have. And with that in mind, I want to always say thank you to all counselors, because we know, especially the resources that you have, and we always want to assist and add instead of be burdensome to you guys. So thank you for all that you do. Thank you, Monique.
Absolutely, and thank you, Pete. Awesome presentation per usual. I just want to remind you all, I do see a couple of questions, but keep them coming. We will circle back at the end of our presentation and we will get those questions answered. Thank you again, Pete. So take a minute, stand up, stretch, grab you a sip of water, or if you have your coffee still nearby, mine's a little cold, but it's still delicious. We're going to prep for our final session. We've already had 2 dynamic sessions. I want to remind you, if you're joining us a little late or if you had to step out, no worries. We are recording this presentation. Just a really quick plug. I shared earlier that you all can join SACAC at no cost because you're in the state of Florida, and if you're at a public school. But I want to remind you of part of that membership, there are benefits, right? So Corey talked a little bit about, our conference and understanding that there could be some barriers at time with either conferences or programs that counselors would like to initiate. But SACAC offers its members a grant opportunity called the Extending the Green Professional Grant that is established to essentially support special programming. So for the sake of time, I won't read the entire slide, but that information is located on our website. But you first have to be a member, but you can apply for a grant that opened this week. So it's like Happy National School Counselors Week to us as a gift. On the 5th, it opened, and you'll notice that the timeline is active all the way up until the March 11th deadline for you to apply for a grant that typically ranges between $500 to $3,700. So this is an awesome opportunity for you to get assistance to support college tours, ACT resources, different educational workshops, and things like that. So just a little shameless plug about the benefits of being a member. I also want to share that, just to be transparent, for 2 years, I was able to participate in the SACAC conference solely because of the CPF fund, or the Counselor Participation Fund. These are coins that are set aside by SACAC to ensure that school counselors are able to attend professional development being SACAC's annual conference, summer seminar, sweet tea tour, and dry run. So SACAC really does take care of its members. Again, membership comes with benefits. So while this application cycle has closed, if you become a member, you'll get more information, and the cycle will reopen next year, and you can apply for our next conference at no cost potentially. All right. Our final presenter is none other than my partner in crime today, and I'm excited to introduce Sierra. Sierra is the co-founder and director of academic coaching at Ardendo Learning. Passionate about empowering all students, she is focused on closing the education opportunity gap and inspiring lifelong learning through facilitating student-mentor relationships. Sierra served at Prior to Ardendo Learning, Sierra served at the Birmingham Education Foundation, where she created networking opportunities for students in the community and worked to provide equitable educational programming. Sierra earned her Bachelor of Arts degree from Stanford University, where she studied Spanish, language and literature, and business. She then went on to get her Master of Education degree in Curriculum and Instruction from the University of Central Florida. She currently lives in Orlando, Florida, and is pursuing her PhD of Education and Learning Sciences. In her free time, if she has any at this point, right? In her free time, you can find her spending time with her family and friends, exploring local coffee shops, and reading her latest fiction find. I am excited to turn it over to my partner in crime, Sierra, to share self-care strategies in a time of continuing changes for today's counselors. Sierra, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Monique. Awesome. So like Monique just said, where is that free time? I don't know. We'll be talking about it soon. If you want to go to that next slide for me, Monique. Yes, awesome. So like we've been talking about today, there are a lot of changes that we're seeing. And I think that can be one of the challenges in general, is just, part of our job is keeping up with the constant changes, and taking care of ourselves amidst that can be a pretty big challenge in and of itself. And even as she was reading that bio and said all the things that I do in my free time, she's right. Like, where is that free time? What am I doing with that? And it's actually in my presentation today about how we can do that. But yeah, so I would love to share some with you. I'm not a licensed mental health counselor, but I'm going to share from my personal experience today, as well as from my colleagues. What they've shared with me is important to them as well. So first, I'm going to share a little bit about what you can expect today. I want to know who's in the room. We did get a list of registrants, but I kind of want to know who's here today, and what is on your mind. What are the biggest stressors that you have, as well as maybe what's really helpful for you to manage that stress. And then we're going to go through some gentle reminders of honestly what we already know when it comes to taking care of ourselves. We're mental health, or we're counselors. Of course we know the right answers. Of course we know the advice that we give to our students. But I think sometimes it is really hard for us to take that to heart. And so I'm going to share a little bit about the importance of taking care of ourselves and what that means, how to do it practically. And then hopefully that third bullet point says overview of resources. So when talking to some counselors counselors, one thing that they requested is a list of quick access links so that they can send that to parents and not have to be sending the same email over and over again, but just to have something that's really easy to access. So we'll go through all of that shortly. But first, I want to know who's in the room. So there's a couple ways that you can get that link. I'm going to throw it in the chat. Also, you can scan that QR code, whatever is easiest for you. And just fill out that questionnaire real quick for me if you would. It doesn't ask for like your name or personal information or anything. It just is, what kind of counselor are you? How many years have you been in the profession? And then again, if you would like to share something that you have been stressed out by in this role. I know that we just talked about FAFSA. We talked about different changes about how to support our students in the Black community. So kind of think through what we can do for you, as well as we share at the end. If you send those responses in, I'll be able to share a little bit about what works for us as well. And hopefully we can collaborate in that way. But as you're doing that, I want to talk about this quote. So this says, "We cannot pour from an empty cup." Now I included this quote because I have two very strong opposing emotions about this quote. On the one hand, I full-heartedly agree with this. We cannot serve our students well if we are empty ourselves. We cannot take care of our families, our friends. We cannot be a good friend, a good sibling, a good aunt, a good uncle, whatever it might be, if we are pouring from an empty cup. But my other emotion is I feel like I'm pouring from an empty cup all the time because I have to. How are we supposed to manage what it looks like to be in this role sometimes and the hours that we hold and pour from a filled cup, right? What does that actually look like? So earlier Monique was talking about we're college counselors. Of course, we eat lunch at 2 or 3 p.m. We're college counselors, of course, whatever it might be. And I think though that might be true, I want us to kind of think through how can we reflect on our own schedule, our own commitments, our own life, and what does that taking care of ourselves look like, and why is it important? So as those surveys are coming in, we have a few responses so far. I see that we got the private university side, we got some public school counselors, a handful of private school counselors, and some things that we're talking about for things that are stressing us out the most in work is unrealistic parent expectations. Wow, yes, we could talk about that for a long time. Motivating new employees, again, the FAFSA changing, balancing work and family. So all of those are really good answers and helpful for us to kind of sift through as we go through the presentation and think through what we need to personally navigate. So if we go to the next slide, because I can't pull these data right away and show them to you, I took a little bit of the data that my mom and Scott Thigpen, who is a licensed mental health counselor, took in 2022. So for that SACAT conference, they surveyed the people who were attending, and they got 230 responses. And I wanted to share just 2 data points with you all to kind of ground what's going on with us, right? What's happening with us right now. But this is data from these are data from 2 years ago. So I'll mix and match the data. But the first thing is, how stressed do you feel during the academic school year? And if we look at this chart, 75% of the respondents out of the 230 responses said that they were stressed from a level 7 to 10, with most people saying that they are at a 7 or an 8 during the academic school year. Now, I know this to be true, but seeing that on the page is a reality that I think we need to sit with and navigate what that might mean for us. On the next slide, we see what is stressing us out the most. And that is very similar to what I'm seeing in your responses coming through. So number 1 is workload. And then we have parent expectations, administration expectations, etc. There were other responses on this survey, but the top percentages of these are all having to do with work. There was life balance, personal issues, medical issues, things like that were on this survey, but almost all of the biggest stressors are our work. So if that's true, what do we have to do, right? And so we're going to talk through some of the importance of self-care, why it's important, and look at it from a humanistic lens. So if we go to the next slide, well, we're going to be talking about everything that's coming up through a humanistic framework. And the reason why I brought in like a theoretical framework was partially because I think it's important to remember that we are human. I think sometimes in this job, it is we are giving so much of ourselves constantly that it is hard to remember that we have a limit and that we're human. And so this framework specifically discusses the fact that personal growth and self-reflection are critical for us to care for others. And as I was reading that, I sat back and I was like, I often forget to take care of myself. On the list of things that's on my to-do list, the things to take care of myself are never on the top. It's taking care of my family members or my job or my students or anything else besides myself. And I think in making this presentation, in fact, it helped me reflect on my priorities and kind of what I'm doing, because the reality is, unfortunately, I cannot give from an empty cup. Next, we have What's the next slide? Okay, so I wanted to talk about some of the stats or some of the information that was helpful for me in reframing why taking care of myself was important. And this study by Velez, Cruz, and Holston, done by one of my friend's colleagues, found that burnout is actually decreased by self-care. I feel like in this season, especially in February, a lot of us are on the edge of burnout. Either we're burnt out, we're about to be burnt out, or we can see it on the horizon, right? And taking care of ourselves actually decreases that feeling of burnout. So if we go to actually don't go to the next slide yet, sorry about that. So yeah, burnout is decreased by self-care. What I wanted to talk about this, I think there was a time period where the phrase self-care was like a buzzword, and I heard it a lot, and it felt like it was an impossible thing to do because it was almost like it was commercialized. And so when I talk about self-care today, I just want to be clear that I'm talking about taking care of ourselves as a whole human and that we are human. So to do that, there's a couple of things that I want us to keep in mind. Okay, now you may go. So as I was thinking about this, I was saying, okay, that's great. Taking care of myself is great. I get it. It'll help me not get burnt out. But this quote from that same article really stood out to me as something that I realized was true of my work with students. And it talks about that this emotional capability that we have when we are at the edge of burnout can lead to something called compassion fatigue. Compassion fatigue. We, as counselors, are constantly having to be an empathetic person, a person who has compassion for others in our field, right? And I think what happens that we don't realize sometimes is that we only have so much empathy. Unfortunately, I don't have that study here, but there was a research study done that discussed how we have a limit to our capacity for empathy. And for me, when I heard that, I was like, nah, I have infinite empathy. Give me empathy for all the people. And I want to deeply care about every single issue. I want to deeply care about every single person that I meet. And the more that I did reading and research in this area, I realized that there is a capacity to empathy. It's how we use that empathy that we have control over. And when we do not take care of ourselves, that capacity for empathy varies. And so with those things in mind, the fact that we're human, the fact that self-care can decrease burnout, and the fact that we almost require compassion for this job, but that can diminish if we're not careful, that leads us into what we can do. So the first thing, if we switch the slide, yes, thank you, is to prioritize work-life balance. That's one of the biggest things that I saw in the responses that y'all sent, is work-life balance. Well, what does that even look like? Well, before we really get into that, I do want to talk about how our students notice. So a really quick story. I am an IEC, an independent counselor, as well as an academic coach. And that means that I work with students in 6th through 12th grade, working on math, English, history, all that good stuff. And I've been working with one student for about 3 years, and she is on top of it now. She is diligent. She gets all of her stuff organized. She knows what she's doing when it comes to her executive functioning skills, all that good stuff. And the other day, I was working with her, and she goes to me, I wish I had 36 hours in the day. And I was like, what do you mean? She goes, I have a math test tomorrow, a history test tomorrow, an English paper due. And she just started listing all of these things. And it was after she had gone to softball practice. And so she was already tired. And she's like, yeah, I probably get 2 hours of sleep tonight. And so I think that is a heavy reality when a student comes to you and says, I wish I had 36 hours in the day. And I responded of like, well, if you had 36 hours, wouldn't you just work more and then still not get any sleep? And wouldn't that just not be a good result? And she looked at me, and I realized as I was talking to her about this, that she's watching me live my life. And I do not have the best work-life balance in this season. And it made me reflect on the fact that as we give our students advice, it is so easy to do. It is so easy to say the right thing, but our students notice our behaviors. And she kind of turned to me and was like, well, like, you're busy all the time and you like are working till 10 p.m. And I was like, you're right. This is not the best example that I could be setting. So I think that's important to prioritize work-life balance, not just for yourself, but for others. And then the second thing, so this is getting into our practical things. So I would love for you to put in the Q&A maybe, what are some fun things that you're doing for your mental health? So as we think about, okay, that is the reason why we need to take care of ourselves. What are some ways we're taking care of ourselves? So some of you in the form said that you would like to read a little bit more, that you would like to spend time with family. But yeah, if you want to put in the chat, what are some fun things you are doing for your mental health? Or the Q&A, sorry. And I'll say for me, a friend recently asked this question to me, and I paused because I didn't have an answer, which was a reality check for me to be like, wait a second, I'm not doing anything for myself in this season. I paused and I was like, I guess I'm spending time with friends and family, and I'm reading for fun sometimes. But the reality was I just couldn't come to an answer very quickly. Let's see. Oh, I love that answer. Someone said walks in the park. So walks in the park is a delightful thing to do for your mental health. Monthly massages or facials, let's go. That was one thing that she said, that she was getting a massage, and I was like, that's a great idea. I need that. Ooh, naps. If you're figuring out a way to get in naps, please tell me your magic. Again, walks outside. I think that's one of the best ones. We're going to talk about that in a second. Oh, I love this one. Coach my little kids' soccer team. It's like herding cats, but I get fresh air and some exercise. Love it. Reading more. I would love to hear what you're reading. I'm a big reader. I love this, being intentional about keeping in touch with my family and friends. Ooh, and someone says weekly water aerobics. Awesome. So thank you for sharing those. Hopefully if you you were like me and couldn't really answer the question right away, that you get some ideas from the chat. Okay, go ahead and go on to the next slide. So we're going to get to some suggestions that are a little bit more practical. Next slide. So the first thing, when I was asking my colleagues about what they would want to hear on a day like this, talking about our stress and mental health, one person said, I would like to be reminded that stress is inevitable. It's going to come and go with every season. I thought that was really helpful because sometimes I get stressed and I'm like, I can't believe I did it again. I can't believe I messed up and I'm so stressed again. And the reality is it's going to come and go, and sometimes life happens. The second thing, and probably the most common thing that I saw amongst my colleagues and their answers to this question, was boundaries. That they need to set boundaries in order to be able to do this job well, to be a human, to be a good family member, all of that good stuff. And when talking about boundaries, again, could have probably done an entire presentation just on boundaries. But the one piece of advice that I've gotten about boundaries recently that was really helpful is to say no when you are at 90% capacity. Now, there's two things about this that I want to note. The first is you got to know what your 90% is, right? Your 90% is not going to be the same as your colleagues, as someone else on this call, right? 90% looks different for every single human based upon who you are. So that's going to take some reflection. Sorry, gave you a homework by accident. But to set boundaries, you kind of need to know what your 90% is. And then the second thing is 90% is the number because we're going to say yes to a lot of things, just who we are, or who I am at least. But I need that 10% to exist for when things get extra stressful or when things go wrong. So quick anecdote. This past Sunday, I was at 110% over capacity. My cup was fully empty, drained to the last drop. There's a lot of deadlines this week for me. Just for some reason, everything converged at the exact same time on top of normal everyday work. And I was at high capacity. And on Sunday night, I had worked all day after working 12 hours on Saturday. And I was like, okay, I just need to buckle in for 5 more hours and then I got this. So, I'm going to be able to accomplish what I need to do. And then I went into the fridge, grabbed some leftovers that someone else had brought home, ate 2 bites, and then had to go to the ER because there was cashews in it. And I am highly allergic to cashews. So y'all, when I say that I no longer have capacity to do anything, I really wish that I had thought about what that 90% really looked like for me instead of kind of making decisions that led me to a place where I was at 110%, and had said yes to one too many things. Now, you're not going to be at 90% at all the time. For me, I couldn't have avoided some of the things that got me to 110%. So the reality is, like in the first bullet point, stress is inevitable. So give yourself grace when things do not go according to plan. And then the last thing on the slide is to share. Find ways to process your stress with colleagues or professionals or other healthy outlets, such as licensed health counselors that you can talk to. But if you're sharing in the workplace, sometimes it's easy to end up complaining sometimes. And so I wanted to give us a tool to be able to talk about burnout or stress with concrete language. So if you go to the next slide, you'll see that there is an inventory called the Mass Slack Burnout Inventory. One of my colleagues from Valencia was recently talking about how in their department, they were thinking about incorporating this inventory into their workplace because of the importance of the language around stress. This inventory is, I think, about $50. So if you want to do it for your department, it would be like a one-time purchase, I believe. But there is a free one that we're going to include in the resources from Copenhagen. There was a instrument that was used to be able to measure burnout. But this one is the one that is most commonly used because it is specifically for educators. So they have like 5 different categories, and then there's an inventory specifically for educators. So if you're looking for a tool or for some professional development for your department specifically and have the resources to be able to do that, I would highly recommend it. All right, next, some project and time management tools. So here are some more practical resources that you might be able to use. The first one is ClickUp. So some of you might use this or have a project management software already. But if you do not have a project management software and want one for free that works pretty well, in my opinion, ClickUp is the one that I would use. So our organization uses ClickUp, and we used it for the past 2 years without having to pay. We just ran out of storage. So to give you an idea of how much space it has. On that website, you can kind of plan out your entire year of what's going on and then put tasks underneath each thing and work backwards, and it'll automate a lot of that for you. And you can invite other people in your office to be on that same thing and assign them different tasks and interact on that interface pretty seamlessly. So I recommend that one. Monday.com is one to make your life easier, scheduling software. So you can book me, Google Appointments, Outlook, depending on your school, will be the best choice. And then I have a couple of other ideas for project and time management tools. But the only one that I'm going to talk about on this list is the Know Yourself. So one thing that I feel like I hear a lot about time management is just the stress of getting things done. And for me, what I realized is everybody's different. And so for one of my colleagues, they love to do the hardest thing first. They need to, what they call, eat the frog, do the hard thing so that they can get it done and not be stressed about it anymore. For me, I am the opposite. I will dilly-dally until the cows come home if I do not have something fun that I do first. So I like to start my day with the one fun task that I know I can get done, enjoy myself, and then jump into the hard thing. Do the hard thing, and then after a long day of work, the last thing that I do is the easy thing because I don't need as much brain power. So just figure out what works best for you. All right, next slide. So this slide talks about some more obvious tools. I'm not going to talk too much about each of these, but in the chat or what's it called? In the responses that y'all sent, one of the things I saw the most was exercise and then again, boundaries. So prioritizing exercise is really important. I'm going to be vulnerable. It is one of the hardest things for me to do based upon my schedule. I start at like 8 a.m., 9 a.m., but then I often have to work until 10 p.m. So like, I don't want to walk in my neighborhood at 10 p.m. or like, well, there's no gym that I really want to go to at that time of night. So it's been hard for me to incorporate it, but it is so, so important for us. And kind of bringing it back to us as counselors, regular exercise leads to emotional resilience and regulation. So kind of thinking about that compassion fatigue, exercise helps us build capacity for us to have compassion. And I think that is probably one of going to be the driving incentive for me to create better systems around exercise. The next one is to breathe. Take a moment to take a deep breath. Resources like Headspace might be a really good one to download and just take 7 minutes for you to take a deep breath and kind of let things go from the stress of the day. Headspace might be paid at this point, and if that is true, Spotify, if you have a subscription to Spotify, they actually have Headspace meditation on that app as well. And then the last one I really want to talk about is gratitude. There was a statistically significant decrease in stress from the baseline to a 1-week follow-up in the study that they did in the Journal of Happiness, such a fun journal. Gratitude is something that needs to be practiced. I find that I am a pretty grateful person in general, but to be specifically grateful is important. And so when they look at stress, and if you find yourself feeling really overwhelmed, I started doing this practice where I would say something very specific that I am grateful for in that moment. And my heart rate, I saw decrease. I saw a physical relaxation in my body. And so that has been a really helpful tool for me personally. Next. Now, this is the resources for counselors that I was talking about earlier. This might not apply to you. You might already have your own fancy handout that exists. So if you do, no worries about this, but I did want to provide access for quick links for you to be able to hand to parents if that's something that you need. There's QR codes on the screen if you want access to the Canva link and the Google Doc. So I'll explain them real quick. So the quick links for students or for parents and students is an editable Canva link that you can duplicate and change for yourself if you need to. There's 3 different categories that students and parents often ask me for that I should have made this for myself a long time ago, honestly. For Bright Futures, the eligibility requirements I hear all the time, and a lot of my students don't really remember all the answers, and so we have to pull up that website every time. There's the main website and then the handbooks from Bright Futures. Then we have the FAFSA, some of the links that Pete just talked about, I linked here as well. And then FAFSA has a YouTube playlist that has a few videos that are short, about 2 minutes, that you can watch through or a student can watch through. And then for the college entrance exams, I have registration links and accommodations links. Because again, a lot of times students will come to me and be like, I have my accommodations already, right? And I'm like, well, there's a few more steps that need to be taken for each different test. And then on the Google Doc on the right, it's a collaborative link. So you can comment on it, anything that you would like to add, and hopefully we can create a resource that other counselors contribute to, hopefully, so that way we can provide an opportunity for our public school counselors or other counselors who might just need one place where everything is. So it's easy access links, and hopefully we can update this as time goes on. I will make sure that I am on top of it. Good, next. So I just wanted to end with what I took away from this presentation, because I can't really hear from you. But my main takeaways was that life is inevitable. As I was making this presentation, I realized I'm gonna end up in the ER sometimes. There's gonna be things that go wrong, and life is inevitable, but it is important that we take care of ourselves. As I'm sharing these, if you want to share any takeaways that you have or anything that's worked for you to manage your mental health, feel free to share that in the chat now or in the Q&A now. And then the last one is to reflect on what you need. I think it's really easy to give a presentation on self-care and say, here are all the things that you must do. You must exercise, you must eat well, you must get 8 hours of sleep, you must do all of these things. But the reality is every single one of our lives is different, and it is difficult to do everything at once. So take an inventory of where you're at, right? For some of you, it means figuring out a way to set boundaries on your work hours instead of working the way that you're working now so that you can spend time with family. For some of us, it is getting an hour away to be able to read by the lake. For some of us, it might be just taking a deep breath and meditating for 5 minutes in between meetings and scheduling that in. So it just depends on who you are. And I wanted to make sure that we had a little bit of time to say, okay, there's a lot of changes. There's a lot of things going on. And it is important for us to reflect. So as we conclude, there's one thing that I did not include in the presentation, but wanted to know if y'all needed, so feel free to let us know in the Q&A. But one thing that is changing or has changed is the ACT has a digital and paper option. That's a link that I've included in the Google Doc. There was a what's it called? The SAT has gone digital, and then the CLT is available in Florida. So if you wanted a resource about when to advise for which test and why, I've been doing test prep for students for about 5 years as well. And so if you want any insight on that, I would like a document that kind of has a flow chart just for you as counselors, not to give to students and parents. Please let me know, and I'd be happy to put something together. And then finally, on that Google Doc, you couldn't see it, but one of the links is to Khan Academy's instructions on the college admissions process. So one of the counselors that I spoke with asked for an example of a SAR that had a traditional student profile for UCF, FSU, or UF. And I'm working on getting those, but in the meantime, I was looking for a resource that kind of denoted, okay, you need to have more rigorous coursework. Yes, we need to take the ACT, SAT, or CLT. Yes, we need to be doing extracurricular activities, and someone other than you or a parent saying it. These videos do describe all of those elements as well, and so that link is there for you if you'd like it. Well, thank you for spending some time with me talking about you all and how you care for others. This is a list of resources that I used for the research that I pulled from, but the reality is it's really hard to remember to take care of ourselves. I hope that you do remember to take care of yourself, and that through this you've been able to reflect on some things that will work for you. Thank you.
Awesome. And thank you. What a great way to end our third and final session. We had such an engaging conversation. I want to invite all of our presenters to join me back on camera if you're able to, and we're going to work through the questions. And I want to invite you all as attendees, if you do still have questions, to go ahead and put them in the chat. I'm going to stop sharing momentarily so we can have a Q&A session. But I am, all right, perfect. I'm going to make my way through starting at the very top from the morning session with those questions, okay? One second here. All right, the first question. And I believe this is going to be towards AJ and Dr. Robinson-Spann, okay? With the graduation rates of Pell eligible students being so low, how do we rationalize encouraging Pell eligible students to attend college and accumulate debt with such low graduation rates? In addition to accumulating debt without attaining a degree, the psychological impacts of viewing oneself as a failure for not completing college are sure to have long-lasting ramifications. Where are our efforts best directed to address this and bring real value to Pell eligible students' lives? And I want to correct myself, that could also be Pete as well, as far as that question goes. So I'm going to open the floor. Any of our panelists want to comment?
Yes, I'll start. So I think the core thing that we need to focus on is that being from a low-income background isn't the reason why students fail. It's something that's associated with it, but it's not the cause. And I do not think our system is inherently against, or like it's something nefarious in terms of supporting and promoting higher education among low-income students. I think we all recognize the value of education and see it as a way of upliftment and helping people achieve and build lives beyond their original circumstances. The issue is we're just not very good at providing consistent services and support for many students to be successful. So figuring out why that is our first step. And as part of my work with the College Board and just in general research that I do in education is figuring out kind of what are the different pieces students need to be successful and what are the barriers and frictions that they run into during their college process. And one of the main things that stands out is preparation. So understanding how students at those schools where they're graduating at 70, 80, 90%, what does preparation look like? And why does that differ so much across socioeconomic backgrounds? So that's a key area. And I think it's really important for counselors to really utilize their power in terms of how they work with students, but also how they work within their schools and the administrators and the courses to really help students understand what preparation looks like for college going itself and not for a particular institution. An institution may say you only need 2 years of math, for example, but does someone with 2 years of math traditionally graduate from the colleges that a student is interested in? Those are the types of things that you can really kind of utilize your expertise and relationships to help students better understand what they can do to be successful. Because I think our focus on being college ready in terms of the admissions process is a lot different than being college ready in terms of being a graduate, particularly within 4 years, which is the goal. Because once you get past that 4 years and you're not accumulating your credits or you're not graduating or moving on to your higher level courses, that's also very important for confidence, self-esteem, and finances. So we really want kids to be able to matriculate and acquire their credits and make it to their sophomore standing, their junior standing within that 2 and 3 year period so they can continue and progress on time. So these are the things that we really need to be thinking about long term when we're helping students identify an institution, access the financial aid resources, and figure out best fit college in terms of culture as well as academic preparation. So it's a continuous process in terms of getting the right research into the right people, but that's why these types of webinars and experiences are important, because we can share information with a wide variety of people who can influence student behavior and decision making on different levels.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Spann. I'm sorry, I'm getting a little feedback, so I apologize. But I would only add to that two things. One is a personal perspective. I remember in high school, to your point about counseling towards certain institutions, my senior, we called them back then, stood up and said, if you want to go to LSU, I grew up in Louisiana, here is what you must do. Only school she talked about to the entire senior class. So it can happen. But that said, what I'd also like to indicate is that while we did not include this information in our deck, it is still the fact that a college degree has financial benefits. Students who go to college on average earn more than those who do not. And so having a Pell Grant student enter into college with the right fit, to Dr. Spann's point, and graduate puts that student in a stronger financial position than if that student would not have gone to college. It does not say that trade school or other practical type of training could be of a benefit to them. However, statistically, as you may know, going to college and getting a 4-year degree is of the greatest benefit financially in the long run to that student. And so we want to be mindful of that. The other thing is that I'd hate for us, and I'm not suggesting that the person who asked the question was insinuating this, but I'd hate for us to decide ourselves which of our students should go on to college or should be encouraged to go to college and which should not. I wouldn't want us to get into the guessing game or stratifying students in that particular way. I think all students should be given all options that pertain to them.
Excellent. Pete, did you have anything you want to add?
Absolutely. I just want to absolutely agree and completely, in fact, reinforce the fact that upon the conversation that we just had, that is absolutely true, that it is based on student preparation. And student preparation includes getting to know themselves. Like, for example, do they really love or can fruitfully, successfully proceed in a huge, large environment, such as a huge college or a medium school or a small school. For example, if they come from a smaller high school or a technical or private school, they're used to a smaller, personalized environment. Submitting them to one of our largest universities is a drastic change. So that is absolutely one of the things. And preparation in terms of, knowing exactly what they want to study. Do they have prep? Do they have the foundation to actually get there? Very, very important things. But more importantly, just like AJ said, ultimately, we always want to encourage our students to reach for the skies, but also be realistic. That's why, once again, student preparation comes into play. Where am I going? How much does it cost? How much is what a burden is on me? And am I truly prepared for that institution? It's not our decision to make, but the more information that we provide them, the good information, the information that counselors provide them is essential. And yes, I completely concur with everything that was stated earlier.
Excellent. Thank you, panelists. The next question. I haven't been able to get an answer from FSA for several weeks. A student submitted her part, but her father did not. However, it's now letting her father submit his part. Excuse me, it's now not letting her father submit his part. Do you happen to know what she should do?
Definitely. Okay. So just so everybody understands, the FAFSA had a soft opening in December and into January. What that meant is also with additional communication indicated that throughout this entire time, students, parents were able to submit that information, but those applications were just being stored. They were not actually processed. Now, if the student has received an email that the application has been processed, yes, then the student and any parental information that was deemed or identified to submit the FAFSA can now go in there and access that application and actually change it. Because prior to the student not getting an email saying that the application has been processed or is incomplete, the student cannot, nor the parent can access the student's FAFSA application.
Excellent, thank you. Sierra, do you want to get the rest of those questions?
Excuse me. I see one from, do students get their FSS before the FAFSA is processed? Pete, do you have a
Yes. So the students that's why it could be very confusing. The student will receive an information that yes, we have received your application. Now, the students who say that communication from initially could say you may be eligible for federal financial aid in terms of Pell and in terms of student loans, but there is no SAI provided because the actual application had not been processed prior to January 31st. They are starting to process now. However, now if a student does go in there, submits a FAFSA application and it does get processed, they will be notified your application has been processed. The FSS, the FAFSA submission summary will contain the FSI and will say, yes, your application has been processed. But also please note that even though your FAFSA application has been submitted, schools have no access to that because the FSA or the U.S. Department of Education's Federal Student Aid Office will not provide the schools those completed FAFSAs until mid-March to late March.
Okay, thank you. We have a counselor here who has a student attending UF who is a National Merit Scholar, and they're wondering, can you explain how the FAS and the Benequisto scholarships work with the NM Award or the National Merit Award and any other awards earned?
Correct. So depending on the status of the National Merit Scholarship recipient, there are certain types. If the student receives a type where they actually receive a scholarship, and in this case, University of Florida will evaluate that student. And if they are deemed Benequisto scholarship recipient, they will contact us at the Florida Department of Education. And the Benequisto scholarship is actually 100% paid scholarship. So it is not like Bright Futures that covers just tuition and cost. The Benequisto scholarship covers the entire cost. But the Benequisto amount is going to be the amount of the students' Bright Futures plus their National Merit Scholarship, the addition of those two subtracted from the Benequisto scholarship to cover the entire amount.
Okay, thank you. I don't see any more questions. Monique, do you have anything?
I don't see any more questions, but before we close out, I want to say this. Do not log off just yet, attendees. Let's first give a virtual round of applause to our amazing presenters. We can use the Q&A. You can give them a shout out, share your takeaways, but thank you all for being here. Again, I can't say it enough how much we appreciate you taking the time to pour into counselors today, especially during National School Counselors Week. So this is appropriate. I want to remind you all that this recording, I know I've said it several times, but because it was so good, I know you wanted to go back and get this information and review the data, especially. I have some great bullet points, but it'll be nice to go back and just hear it again. Throughout the presentation, there was some amazing data and resources that were shared. Again, gentle reminder to make sure that you do look for a follow-up email from SACAC that will have the information regarding this session, asking you also to complete a survey. We want your feedback because we want to continuously make these programs better and make sure that they're what you're wanting, the information you're wanting. I'm sharing my screen once again, and I hope everyone can see it. Remember, I shared with you that membership comes with benefits, right? So I'm giving y'all a little bit of tea because the members of SACAC actually got this information in November. So shout out to Julie Carter and Arlene Otterbridge because they are our SAI or SACAC Area Initiatives of Florida membership. They actually held a meeting for the state of Florida and they gave us some amazing updates, and one being some tea on the SUS tour. So you see it here, okay? Again, membership comes with benefits, but we're giving you a little bit of tea. I want to point out that for the first time, I know since I've been a counselor here in Florida, that we're starting at an HBCU. We're taking it to FAMU. So it's exciting to see the tour dates are there. More information will be coming from the Board of Governors, but make sure that you go ahead and add those dates to your calendar. And again, if you want more updates and information, you know what to do. You need to become a member of SACAC. Now, I have another little bit of tea. See, if you stay on, you get the tea and the information. There are 11 Florida districts that are working to coordinate a virtual HBCU fair. That includes Brevard, Broward, Collier, Hillsborough, Lee, Orange, Osceola, Palm, Pasco, Pinellas, and of course my district, Polk. We are excited to offer this opportunity of a virtual HBCU fair to juniors. More information will be coming. It's going to be held on March the 5th. With that, because you registered and you attended this session, you will get a personal invite. We got you. Okay. So just a reminder to go ahead and save that date. The time is scheduled as of now from 5:30 to 7:30, but more information will be shared via email to you because you registered for this event. With that, we are excited and hope that you not only enjoyed this session, that you will consider, if you're not a member, becoming a member. And also, if at any way possible, meet us in North Carolina for our 2024 SACAC conference. And we have a cool QR code available to you to just go take you directly to the website, courtesy of my partner in crime, Sierra. You see the little dinosaur in the middle, that's all her.
I also just put it in the chat if you want to click the link.
Perfect. Thank you. You can scan that QR code to not only visit our website, but to get information and resources to also share with your administrators on why it's important for you to receive professional development. This is great. We enjoyed having you online, but it's also very important, if at all possible, and you can get the support to be able to attend in person and to network. So wanted to share that on my
I want to also share, tomorrow is the last day for early bird pricing. So if you're a staff member and you want to get that early bird pricing, I just wanted to send out a reminder that tomorrow is the last day for that. So that's why I wanted to make sure we incorporated that and gave you some access to resources, able to sign up if you want to join us. I'll be there, so I'd love to see you in person. And I don't know if Monique is able to join us, but I'm so excited for the conference. So looking forward to seeing you there.
Y'all, we can talk all day if you can't notice about SACAC, but the conferences are amazing. This was just a taste. Our presenters were phenomenal here. So I hope that this showed you just what SACAC has to offer. And we hope that, again, you will join us in North Carolina in just a short couple of weeks. So thank you for joining. Oh, hi.
Before I let everyone go, speaking of phenomenal, this is Darren Morgan. I'm a member of the SACAC SAI board along with Corey and Kristen. I just want to reiterate what Corey said earlier, but this was actually a truly phenomenal presentation, and I learned a lot of information. I don't even live in the state of Florida, but I took tons of notes and data from all of the spreadsheets in the workshop. So thank you all for putting this together, but special shout out to Monique and Sierra for all your hard work. They've been working on this for months, and they did a great job putting together a great team of panelists to provide this information for you. I hope to see you all in Raleigh in a couple of weeks. Please be sure to register for the conference. And if you haven't done so already, make sure you get your hotel. Once you register for the conference, you'll be able to get a discounted rate on the hotel. So please do that as soon as possible. All right, thank you all, and thanks again, Monique and Sierra.
Thanks, Darren.
Absolutely. Thank you. I'm going to stop the recording. We thank you all for joining us. And again, this recording will be available. Presenters, if you could just stay on for just a few, I greatly appreciate it. And SACAC Area Initiatives as well.